Okay, we're going to discuss macromolecules. Okay, let's first take a look at the element carbon. Carbon has 6 protons and 6 neutrons, which make up the nucleus. The nucleus of the atom is found in the center. This is our nucleus. Again, it's made of protons and neutrons. Surrounding the nucleus are the energy rings, or shells. This blue circle around each, there's 2 of them. Those are our energy ring. Carbon happens to have 2 energy rings. In the energy rings are where we find our electrons. It's this outermost energy ring that we're concerned with. It has 4 electrons, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Carbon's got those 4 electrons in the outer ring. Those are the electrons that are involved with bonding. When they do bond, it's going to make a covalent bond. That's sharing electrons. And it's typically going to bond either with another carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, or nitrogen. It could be 4 different substances, or it could be 4 of the same substances as you would find in the example methane. 1 carbon bonded to 4 hydrogens. Okay, the macromolecules are large molecules, and there are 4 of them: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. You're probably familiar with the first 3 just from the nutrition, from the foods that you eat. Carbohydrates, breads, pasta, proteins, nuts, meats, and then lipids are the fats like butter or oil. Nucleic acids, these are what make up your DNA and RNA, and those are responsible for your genetic information as well as for making proteins. Okay, as we look at our macromolecules, we need to understand monomer versus polymer. A monomer starts out mono, which means one single unit. It's the smallest unit of a macromolecule. Here we're representing a single molecule, which is our monomer. If you connect monomers together, you make a polymer, and poly means many. So many monomers combined together make a polymer. This polymer that you're looking at in this first example contains 1, 2, 3, 4 monomers to make the polymer chain. Here's another example using Legos. Each individual Lego piece represents a monomer. Combine the monomers together, we make a polymer. This polymer is made of 3 monomers, 1, 2, 3. This last one, again, is a polymer, and it's made of 5 different monomers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 different Legos or 5 monomers combined together to make a polymer. Okay, when we look at our macromolecules, it's important to note that our macromolecules are polymers. These are our macromolecules: carbohydrates, our lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Those are the polymers, but those are our 4 macromolecules. You must know the monomer that makes the macromolecule or the polymer. Carbohydrates are made from sugars. Lipids are made from the monomer fatty acids. Proteins are made from the monomer amino acids. And nucleic acid is made from the monomer nucleotides. In addition to knowing the 4 macromolecules as polymers, you need to know not only their monomers that make them, you need to know the elements that make up each one of our polymers, examples of them, And then you're going to find out as we go through these, there's different words that are synonyms for other words, and you need to be familiar with that to recognize terms. For instance, we said that the sugar, okay, our sugar up here is our monomer to make our polymer carbohydrates. Well, if you combine sugar molecules together, again, poly means many, we could have a polysaccharide. A polysaccharide is an example of a carbohydrate. Here's our single little amino acid as our monomer. Combine those amino acids into a chain, we get a protein. The nucleotide combines together, that's our monomer, combines to make our polymer, nucleic acids. Okay, this chart is going to take our 4 macromolecules, again listing our monomer, and now we're going to look at the elements that make up each one of our macromolecules. Starting with our carbohydrate, again our monomer was sugars, and then the elements that make up our sugar or carbohydrate are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The letter that's put in parentheses, that is the element symbol. Instead of having to write out the whole word, C means carbon, H is for hydrogen, O is for oxygen. And sometimes students will say that's CHO, meaning carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Your carbohydrates are made up of those 3 elements combined in various quantities and different arrangements. If you look at the name carbohydrate, you have the carbo at the beginning, that's for your carbon, and then hydrate, like if you were hydrating yourself, you would drink water, that's your oxygen and hydrogen. Your lipids, the monomer, are fatty acids. Again, you have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, so that CHO. So carbohydrates and lipids are both made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Again, it's the number of the atoms and then the different arrangement that's going to change whether it's a lipid or a carbohydrate. Our proteins monomer are amino acids. The elements that are involved for a protein, again we have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but now we're introducing nitrogen, which is the symbol N. So we have what we say, some students will say CHON, okay? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So if you were looking at a structure and you were trying to decide if it was a carbohydrate, a liquid, or excuse me, a lipid, or a protein, if you see this nitrogen, okay, without phosphorus, phosphorus is down here in nucleic acid, just a nitrogen with oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon, you know that you're looking at a protein. And then our last one is our nucleic acids. The monomer are the nucleotides. Again, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and now phosphorus. So chomp, or chon, and then a P, just different ways to kind of help you keep these straight. If you remember carbohydrate, lipid, protein, nucleic acid, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and all of them. Proteins are going to have nitrogen, and then your nucleic acids are going to have nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay, let's take a look first at carbohydrates. All right, for carbohydrates are responsible for giving us quick energy. The simplest sugar is glucose. If you've ever known anyone to do a marathon or triathlon, towards the end of the race, when they start feeling really, really tired, they'll give them a little container of glucose. It's a quick shot of that carbohydrate to give them a quick boost of energy to help them get to the finish line. For the structure, your cellulose, this is what's going to make up the cell walls of plants, and in our diet that would be considered the fiber that we eat. You can also find something called chitin, which makes up the exoskeleton of insects, and the cell walls of fungi, and fungi are mushrooms. Saccharides are sugars, and we have monosaccharide, disaccharide, and polysaccharide. Mono means one, so one sugar molecule or one saccharide. Disaccharide, di means two, so two sugar molecules or two saccharides. And then poly again means many, so you have many saccharide molecules or many sugar molecules. Okay, continuing with carbohydrates, again they are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Something that's unique about the carbohydrate structure that makes them very easy for us to recognize. They come in rings, and when you look at the structure, down at the bottom, this ring structure, imagine if this was a ring that you could put your finger right through the middle. This ring tells us that it's a carbohydrate. If you have one ring, that's one monosaccharide, such as glucose, fructose, galactose. Here we have two rings represented, so that's a disaccharide. Examples, maltose, sucrose, lactose. And then this last one, we have several rings put together. That represents our polysaccharide. Examples are starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Okay, glucose is a type of sugar. Again, it was a type of monosaccharide, one sugar ring. It's quickly digested to give us that quick boost of energy. But something like a starch, this represents a starch. This is a polysaccharide because you have many sugar molecules connected. Polysaccharide starches would be something like potatoes. They take a little bit longer to digest, but remember, digestion always starts in the mouth. Then you could have something like cellulose that we can't break down at all. And again, that's that fiber that you would find in a plant cell. Again, they are polysaccharides because you have many of the molecules put together, many sugar molecules together. And then glucose is our main source of fuel for our cells. When you're eating carbohydrates, they eventually get broken down into a simplest form, and typically that is glucose. When the body doesn't need all of the glucose for energy, it's going to store this extra glucose in the liver and muscle cells. The stored form of glucose is made up of connected glucose molecules that's called glycogen. So this is representing different glucose molecules all put together, but when it's stored as a polysaccharide, that you're going to call this glycogen. Our second macromolecule are the lipids. Examples of lipids are fats, oils, waxes, some of our hormones such as steroids, the sex hormones testosterone and estrogen. When you eat a diet high in fat such as fried foods, butter, oils, lard, these can tend to clog our arteries. A clogged artery prevents blood from moving through. Here's your clogged artery, much like a sewer pipe does. If a pipe gets clogged, the water can't move through. So you need to have a healthy diet. Now, sometimes people think that we shouldn't have any fat in our diet at all, and that's not true. Our bodies need fat. It's one of our macromolecules that's necessary for us. Okay, important functions of your lipids. They form the cell membrane. This is representing the cell membrane, and we'll go into more detail in our next unit. But the cell membrane is responsible for controlling what enters and leaves the cell. Lipids provide long-term storage of energy. So when someone's trying to maintain a healthy diet, they'll make sure that they have healthy fats, something like an avocado, in their diet to help give them long-term energy. Lipids are important for the endocrine system, which regulates our hormones. Lipids are important for insulation. If we look at our little guy over here who swims in very cold water, that insulation layer is very important to help keep his body temperature. Lipids cushion our organs, and they carry vitamins throughout the body. There's two parts to a lipid, and when you're talking about your lipids, we're referring to our fats. The two parts are glycerol and fatty acid. And when we look at the fatty acid, they're long chains of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The overall lipid looks like a capital E. If we were to draw an E, we'd come down, and then we have our three pieces to our letter E. So it kind of looks like a capital E. The glycerol is this backbone to the letter E. And then you have the three fatty acid chains that are coming out. And again, it's made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The fatty acids are the long chains of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then the backbone of our capital E is our glycerol. Three important types of lipids. The first one is a triglyceride. Triglyceride, think of tri like the number 3. This is your fatty acid bonded together by a glycerol. That was that capital E structure. It just happens to be turned on its side, the backbone being the glycerol, and then the fatty acid chains being the three pieces that come off to give us that capital E structure. A phospholipid, this is what makes up the cell membrane. You have kind of like the top up here, which we call the head, and then these two little tails that come down. And when we look at the cell membrane in our cell unit, we will talk about this in more detail. And then we have cholesterol that makes up for hormones. This is what a cholesterol or a steroid looks like. Okay, our third macromolecule are the proteins. Proteins, again, were made up of the monomer amino acids. The amino acids combine together to make a three-dimensional shape. If a protein is not folded correctly, it's not going to function properly. So that fold is very important. For the fold they're referring to, you have primary structure, a secondary structure, tertiary, and quaternary. And it's just different ways that those amino acids are going to group together to make a chain. And then if you look at the different structures here, you can clearly see that they're arranged or folded differently. Your proteins again are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but now we're introducing the element nitrogen. So if you were to give, if this was given to you, this structure, and they said identify this as which macromolecule, well, you can notice your carbon, you've got oxygen and hydrogen. Then you have these nitrogens. Remember, there's no P on this, there's no phosphorus, so it's just the nitrogen. That's your cue to tell you that you're looking at a protein. Your proteins are also going to have this R, which may or may not be shown on the diagram that you're looking at. Don't worry about the R group. That just means there's another group, another type of substance that's attached there, so you can ignore those R's. What you're really looking for is the nitrogen. Protein shapes are going to dictate the function for the protein. Notice that each one of these on this diagram, they're all different. You have tubes, these cylinder tubes that help transport materials back and forth across the cell membrane. We have what are called collagen fibers in our skin that help give it structure. We have fibers in our muscles that help contracting. We have peptides for hormones for our insulin levels. Chains that are bound together to form a sheet. Hemoglobin to transport oxygen. Antibodies, which are chains bound with binding sites for antigens. Again, different shapes have different functions. Okay, different types of proteins have different functions. You could look at structural proteins, which are going to give shape to your cells or organelles. Organelles are just the little parts that you would find inside of a cell. Some of the structural proteins that you might be familiar with, keratin, which you find in your hair and fingernails, It's also found in the cornea of your eye. Collagen, which is found in our skin and ligaments. Myosin, which is found in our muscles. Cartilage contains glycoprotein, which is proteins attached to a carbohydrate. And we can also find some of those glycoproteins in our ligaments. We also have enzymes for biological reactions that occur. There's hormones that send chemical messages in the body, different proteins that are used for transporting nutrients. Proteins are the most abundant macromolecule. Remember, your proteins are polymers that are made up of monomers, which are the amino acids. There are a total of 20 different amino acids. The 20 different amino acids can arrange themselves in a different order, and then once that chain of amino acids is made, it can fold itself in different structures, which is going to give it a different function. Each one of these little circles is representing an amino acid. So your amino acids combine together into a chain to make some type of protein. Once that chain's made, it's going to fold and twist and wrap around to a specific shape. Some of you might have heard of sickle cell anemia. An individual with sickle cell anemia has misfolded hemoglobin that clumps together, causing the red blood cells to have a sickle shape. Normal red blood cells are these discs that you see with like a little dip in the middle. Those are normal red blood cells that allow for the transporting of oxygen. That's the hemoglobin being transported, transporting your oxygen. Someone with sickle cell anemia, they don't have these little discs, they have that what they call a sickle shape. That's what this is representing, as a sickle shape for a red blood cell. And as a result, when you look at the blood cells moving, transporting oxygen, they're able to move through the little capillaries because they're very flexible. They can fold up, squeeze through, and be able to transport oxygen. Someone with sickle cell anemia, they have this sickle shape, and you'll notice that when it goes to enter into the capillaries, see how it can kind of block, causing a backup of the red blood cells. This causes a person to feel sick. They don't have a lot of energy. Their breathing wouldn't be as strong because they're not getting the oxygen that they would need. However, with medication, they can control this. And then our last macromolecule is the nucleic acid. Okay, your nucleic acid is the polymer. The monomer that makes up the nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. The nucleotide contains a phosphate group, a sugar, and a nitrogen base. This is representing your nucleotide. Here's your phosphate group, your sugar, and then your nitrogen base. Sometimes you'll see they reference this, just for an analogy, the sun, the house, and then a flag, just to kind of help you remember, because you do need to be familiar with this structure. Again, that's your phosphate group, your sugar, and your nitrogen base. Examples of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. On your RNA, you only have a single strand. This blue line is a single strand, and this is made up of a phosphate and sugar, and it rotates. Phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, all the way down. But in the DNA, you'll notice there's two strands. You have this red and this blue. They're still made up of your phosphate group and your sugar, and it still rotates. Phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. Okay, that's considered like the backbone that makes up the DNA and the RNA structure. And again, it's the phosphate group and sugar. And then the rungs, these pieces on your RNA that are sticking out, and then in your DNA that are connecting those two backbone pieces, that's where you're going to find your nitrogen bases. And when we talk about DNA and RNA, DNA replication, we'll get into more detail about the nitrogen bases in the DNA and RNA. But for right now, you need to know your nucleotide is your monomer that consists of phosphate group, a sugar, and a nitrogen base, and that RNA has a single strand for the sugar phosphate group, where DNA has a double strand of the sugar phosphate group. And then in between, we find our nitrogen bases. Your DNA is known as deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA is known as ribonucleic acid. Both DNA and RNA carry our genetic information. You guys are familiar with looking at DNA for genetic information, but they're also responsible to making our proteins, and we'll get into this when we talk about protein synthesis, how proteins are made. We'll see how DNA and RNA fit into that.